Steve Rice with Rocky Mountain Hospitality. How's it going, Steve?
It's a beautiful day, even in almost mid-October, so no complaints here.
Awesome. So where are you at currently, Steve?
We live in North Idaho, about 100 miles south of the Canadian border. There's a beautiful resort town, Coeur d'Alene. That's our nearest big city, if you will. And we live outside a tiny old logging town called Harrison. That's on Lake Coeur d'Alene, and we live in a very rural area, a couple of miles up the river.
Okay, great. And I assume that that is not where you started. Is that true?
For the most part, started in Pocatello, Idaho, a city of about 60,000 now. My father was a professor at Idaho State University and rose to the ranks of vice president of academic affairs. As a young man, I lived in Salt Lake for about a decade, had a great experience there, and then had an opportunity to move back to Pocatello through an employer. And then when my wife and I started doing our own thing, we could live where we chose. We chose North Idaho.
Okay, awesome. So I've shared with you this little tidbit, but I actually have some history with Pocatello. My wife is from Pocatello and her family's still there, and we lived there for a while. And we love it. I love Pocatello. Do you still have family there or any sort of ties that take you back?
I do. Most of my family's there. My mother is turned 90 yesterday, and she's in good health and lives
Awesome.
in Pocatello. Father passed, unfortunately, away several years ago. Both my sisters are in Pocatello, and then love the community. It's 100 years ago, it was a railroad town. Now I would suggest it's more of a university town. And there is good employment there, nice place to live, great outdoor activities. And so we still enjoy going back to visit family and
Yeah.
being involved with the university.
Awesome. So I want to actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I want to put a pin in this real quick. We'll come revisit Pocatello and kind of the beginning, but I want to sort of fast forward real quick and give a background on who you are, what you do. Rocky Mountain Hospitality is your company. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's about 20 years old now, and perhaps even a bit more than that. Uh, my wife and I started with the acquisition of a small economy hotel with Rocky Mountain Hospitality. But prior to that, we'd had some real estate assets, small ones, both in Salt Lake and in Pocatello. But we bought a property after I had been working as a general manager for other hotel groups, and bought one and said, that wasn't so hard to do. Maybe we could do that again, and sort of repeated the formula. And here we are some 20 plus years later with a dozen assets, 11 of which are modest hotels, and one 80 unit apartment complex.
Awesome. So I was doing a little research, and there is a news article that came out about you and your wife and your company back in 2012. Um, let's see, talking about your acquisitions. Let's see, at the time, you employed 100 people, and then it said, and likely to hire another 20 this upcoming summer. So how big is the company now?
We, at any one time, typically have a couple hundred employees. We peak, as do most hotels in this region. We peak in the summer, have to put a little additional staff on then.
Uh,
Winters can be a bit more quiet, although we do have property in Kellogg, Idaho, and one in Sandpoint. Both of those are very near to ski resorts, so they stay strong. But the ballpark, we're going to have at any one time a couple hundred employees working for us, and that's both in Idaho and Montana.
okay.
So a
And
couple
then,
hundred total.
okay, great. And then if you don't mind kind of sharing sort of your because you talked about you being able to move wherever you'd like to kind of live, have the freedom to enjoy the lifestyle that you want where you want. If you don't mind sharing even just like rough numbers of your income level to kind of show that what level people can kind of expect or can kind of aim for?
I remember meeting a individual that had a couple of Subway franchises some 20
Okay.
years ago, well before I was even starting. And what he said was, well, Steve, you can have one Subway, and if you work it, you can make a decent living. So, but to really start to enjoy the fruits of your labor, you have to have three of them. And this was quite some time ago, and we found very much the same thing. When Cynthia and I first started on this, we met a gentleman that was selling a hotel. He was a fine gentleman. He was kind of at the point of life that it was ready for him to retire, and he was selling a hotel that he had had for some 40 plus years. He didn't have much to sell. It was an old property. It was dated, and we told ourselves we didn't ever want to get stuck in that position because it could easily happen. So what we knew was that just like, with him as an example and my friend with the Subways, that our goal would be to have a couple, 2 or 3 different hotels or similar assets.
Yeah.
Being in different markets hedges your risk, and it wouldn't have all our eggs in one basket. So that was the initial goal, and we thought, if we could make $300,000 a year, that would be more money than we could ever spend, and far more than we would need to live on. And that's the case.
Yeah.
We do more than 10 times that now in our net income. It's excess money.
Yeah.
It doesn't make you any happier. We
Yeah.
just have had that level of success. But to get there, you have to change your skill set from being the guy running the Subway
Yeah.
to managing people running your Subways for you. And that was a
Okay.
great time of growth for us. And we have found ways to do it successfully. And you do it through respecting your team members, appreciating that they're the ones on the front line. They're the ones fighting the battles,
Yeah.
giving them the support that they need. And we found that to be a formula for success for us.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So there's a couple things, a couple awesome things that kind of came to my mind as you were talking, that I would love to hit on. One of those being, so, you understand that, money is not the thing that makes you happy, and that's a great realization, because I think there are people out there that, the focus is so strong on the money because they feel like that's the way out to be happy,
Mhm.
but you talked about how you have a lot of excess. Can you touch on sort of what you did for the I at Idaho State? Because that was one of those things, at least in my mind, that kind of shows that, this is what you do with your money when you have excess.
It was a defining moment for us. And now there is a theory that I read decades ago, and it said, here's one way to create wealth in real estate. Buy a rental every year for 20 years, then sit on them for 20 years, and then sell one a year for 20 years. And you say, well, one a year, I could probably pull that off if I worked it. Well, we did that, but in a little bigger game of Monopoly. Instead of houses or duplexes, it was with hotels.
Yeah.
So for about 15 years, we did a major transaction a year. Now, some were sales that we then took the money and got a larger asset, et cetera, et cetera. But in the end, we ended up with a dozen major assets. But Cynthia and I got to a point that and really the concept is, when is enough enough? And we got to the point that enough was enough. We bought a very large piece of land, built a lovely home on it, because up until that point, we lived comfortably. We traveled with our family, but a lot of our net income was reinvested. And that's how you go from one property to a dozen. It doesn't mean you have to, live without the things that you might desire, but in the end, we chose to reinvest the vast majority of our income. We got to a point and said, well, with each property you acquire, it takes a little more time, and time started becoming more precious than the additional funds. We said, okay, this is enough. So we're now to a point that these are good assets that we have. They're going to produce for very long periods of time if we manage them properly. So we don't need to necessarily be growing the company anymore. Now, for a lot of people, the growth is the game, and I respect that. That's their satisfaction. But for us, we had gotten to the point that we wanted to enjoy the fruits of our labor a little bit more. That was a nice place to be. But one of those things, Cynthia and I talked about the things that we believe in. She said to me, well, you don't have to wait until you die to have the things you believe in benefit from your money.
Oh, and sounds like a genius.
Well, it was a good moment for us because we had our wills done, and they're beneficiaries of the causes that we support. Well, she was right on the money there.
Yeah.
So I went to ISU. As I mentioned earlier, my father was the academic vice president there at the culmination of a 30-year career with them. Both my sisters have degrees from ISU. It's a great university in Pocatello. There had been an eye on a hill right at the side of campus, a very large eye, and it had been there virtually for 100 years. There's a lot of history to it we don't need to go into, but for all intents and purposes, it had eroded and it was unsafe, and so they had to tear it down. And it was kind of one of the icons in the community. It was very visible from many areas, and it was unfortunate it got torn down, but we understood why it did. At that time, the university was very focused on getting a school of medicine established so that we can actually have doctors. And so were focusing on the school of medicine, and that's where the excess capital needed to go because they didn't know where it might happen. That project was good for ISU, but even better for the state of Idaho. What is that the state that educates your doctors, they're more likely to stay there, and every state needs more doctors. The school ended up being in Meridian, didn't quite have the capital outlay that it might have had. That also works for ISU and the state of Idaho. But there was an interim period that Idaho State University got a bit behind on some of its capital projects, and the eye was one of them.
Okay.
When the medical school got established, a new president, Kevin Satterley, came in, a fantastic individual. He was given the task from the state board and his own feelings on starting to get the university put back into the proper shape that it needed to be in, and the eye was one of the projects. We heard about the interest. I contacted the director of giving, Kent Tingey at that time, who had been with the university for decades and was a friend. He had me contact Stuart Summers in marketing. I told Stuart that I wanted to buy a vowel, and a little bit later, lo and behold, I'm buying the eye to put up on the hill. And it was a great example for my sons to learn about philanthropy. The community appreciated it. It doesn't matter who did it. It just matters that the eye is back, and it's a great icon for that community.
Do you have other philanthropic endeavors that you've also been involved in Idaho?
That's been the major one. We've supported a scholarship fund for students at ISU for over a decade now. Cynthia is very involved with some church activities and projects that she likes to support. And I'm going to go, it's homecoming next week at ISU. I'm going to take a hard hat tour of the new Alumni Center, and they're still looking for some donations for that facility. And I have been told that the hardest thing to raise money for university is a building that's already been built. So we may struggle a bit with the final aspects of getting some funds put together for that facility. So I'm excited to go take a hard hat tour there and see what naming opportunities or other areas of opportunities there might be. So I'm a huge fan of education. Education changes lives. It offers opportunity to those that are willing to help themselves. And so I would be surprised to not see that I continue my involvement with that. And I, sit on the foundation board at ISU and have all the respect for the institution and want to remain involved.
So, as you're speaking, and what you've shared so far has been amazing. I'm thinking you making enough money to donate, a giant letter on the side of a mountain to a university. You have all these things. You have hotels and everything that you're involved in, and for a lot of people, this seems like something that is out of reach, like a life that is that one can only dream about. Do you think that you are an exceptional individual, that you have a skill set that no one else could possess ever, or would you consider yourself pretty ordinary?
I think everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. And I'm the same. If you were to ask what my specific strength might be, I'm pretty good with numbers. Numbers speak to me like a second language.
Okay.
Let's look at it in that aspect. When people learn a second language, some people always have to think in their main language and then translate into a second language before they can speak their second language. That's very
Yeah.
common. Others learn to think in the new language in addition to their main language. Numbers are like that for me. I can see them; they come together very easily for me. That's not an extraordinary skill, but it's one of my strengths.
Yeah.
Everybody has a strength. So if you want to be an entrepreneur or you want to be successful working for someone else's organization, and both are honorable, you have to find what you're good at, find
Okay.
what your strengths are. So
Okay.
my strength isn't extraordinary. It's simply my strength. And I found an industry that would benefit from that. And at first I worked for others. I ran hotels. I started actually waiting tables in college, got out, and restaurants
Yeah.
is kind of what I knew. So I ran restaurants for people. And then I got into the hotel business. And then one day I said, I think we could probably do this on our own.
Yeah.
So nothing was extraordinary, but I focused on what my strengths were. And that's, I think, the key to anybody's success.
Okay.
And
So,
everybody has some sort of strength.
yes, yeah, I agree. So for you personally, how did you discover this strength, or when did it happen? Was it difficult? Tell us about just how you discovered what your strength is, because that's important for people, and if they can understand how to do that, then more people can be successful.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I knew all along in school that math came easy for me. Oddly enough, memorizing didn't. I would be the world's worst
What?
actor. I could not, we were all in plays and stuff. We were in school. I couldn't remember my lines, not my strength. Right? But I knew that math was good. The question is, at what point did that translate into an opportunity to, in business? And I would suggest that was when I was working hotels. I was worked with a great group, Taylor, in hotels both in Park City and Salt
Okay.
Lake, and then took a GM's job with them up in Pocatello, which was a great opportunity for me to kind of go home, and realized how easy the budgets were for me, easy to
Okay.
remember, easy to notice that something was out of line. Budgets, some people would say, are the language of business.
Okay.
And in our business, our financial controls have been part of what have allowed us to be successful. We see both into the past, the present, and the future. That way, you know if times are looking difficult, what type of reserves you've got, that you can make improvements in,
Yeah.
and you also can talk to bankers. And if you're going to borrow money, you need to be able to talk to bankers. And if you're going to buy real estate, you probably need to borrow money
Yeah.
and to be comfortable with debt. And you're not going to be comfortable with debt unless you've got a good grasp on your numbers and
Okay.
what you think the future will hold.
Okay. So, so just based on what you're saying, sort of my interpretation is you you sort of knew just based off of your experience in school that you were pretty good with math, and then through your job experience, you started. What's the best way to say this? You gained more confidence in your ability to work with numbers because of just you had to work with spreadsheets and stuff like that in your job. Is that correct?
Yeah. And then in fact, when I was down in Salt Lake, and I was still a young enough man, I was around 30, trying to decide, what I wanted to do in life. And I enrolled in Westminster, an
Okay.
outstanding private college down there. In fact, I think there's soon to be a university down there in Salt Lake. Got into their MBA program, took it with accounting emphasis, and
Yeah.
thought I would probably join an accounting firm. And it was because I sensed that strength that I'm not going to say it was easy for me, but with effort I could be good at it, and it was an area that I thought I could excel at. As I went through that program, an outstanding program, got my degree. By that time, I had some nice growth in my career with Kaler, the hotel group, and they had sent me up to Pocatello to be a GM, and it was up there that we decided we could do it on our own. But it
Okay.
was very much, I identified that numbers were a language I could speak, and then I went and got additional education to strengthen that skill.
Okay. Okay. So it's not a quick process by any means. It sounds like kind of a slow thing where you sort of just pick up things as you go, and then
It has
um,
been for us, and there have been so many overnight riches made on the internet that I
yeah,
fear that many young people now think that's the way it should be. That if you don't get rich overnight, you're not going to. And there are overnight sensations like that and overnight riches that are available. What Cynthia and I knew, and I knew even before we met, was there could be a long, steady path, and that seemed more plausible for me. And it wasn't going to be overnight riches, but you could build wealth,
yeah,
and that was always the goal. And so that's what we pursued.
yeah. And I mean, I think you're correct in thinking that there's a lot of young people that are deceived by this notion that riches can be made very quickly. And I think at least from my observations, it's more of a marrying. Like the success comes from preparation until the opportunity comes, and then that's when you can sort of capitalize on it. But building the skills and the knowledge takes a lot of time, and it takes effort, and it takes um, dedication, at least from my experience and sort of what I've observed from other people. And I think that's the right mindset. Like you should expect that.
You're 1,000% right, and maybe you're in one of those industries that you can hit the single home run and you win the game, but those are pretty rare.
Yeah.
That there are numerous opportunities, particularly in the greatest nation in the world, in my
Yeah.
opinion, that if you are willing to do the work, you can handle a little bit of fear,
Yeah.
and be able to step outside the mold. That there's still bountiful opportunity, uh, and the secret is to find your strength. What are you
Yeah.
good at? What's interesting for you? And if numbers were interesting for me, and managing people was interesting for me, then it's not really work, and
Yeah.
then it's pretty easy to be good at it and then hopefully be successful at it because you're enjoying it.
Yeah. Definitely. So there's something you said that sort of piqued my interest. You were 30 when that like that junction point when you decided to go to Westminster and sort of double down on your skill that you believed you had with math. Um, that's what you said, right? It was about 30 is when that
Yep.
happened.
Yep.
Okay. Um, so that's interesting because I'm 30 years old right now, and I think there's a lot of people with in my generation that have kind of been experiencing the same things. Where at about 30, I hit a point where I wasn't doing what I thought I'd be doing at 30, and I didn't have like I wasn't like a millionaire by 30. And, I decided that there were some things that I had to do differently. And I really rededicated myself to trying to improve my skill sets, my mindset, and really tried to bet on myself more and sort of the things that I felt I was good at, and then sort of just move forward and then take the opportunities as they came. But 30 sounds pretty late, and I had sort of like not like a midlife crisis, a quarter life crisis. So I'm wondering, it sounds like you sort of maybe did sort of the same thing. Like 30 is not that it's old, but I think it's older than what a lot of people of my generation are expecting to actually then, to really begin your journey.
Well, I think your point's really well taken, and the 30s are an extraordinary decade because you're an adult and can be taken as an adult at that point. But I mean, who do we see that's successful? Well, we see LeBron and we see, all these people that are 22 years old and internet wizards. And so you think, oh, I missed the boat. No, you didn't miss the boat at all. I wasn't even prepared prior to that to lead. Now I had in my 20s, right out of college, a partner and I bought a tavern, and then that went pretty well for us. And we bought a nightclub. The major employer, through a recession, closed their doors, lost them both. So here I am at 27, and I've had two failed businesses. Well, would I have done better had I been in my 30s? There are some temptations in your 20s when you're running a nightclub that you probably could turn your back on in your 30s, maybe. But big picture, the market soured. I wasn't the only one that lost business in that. It was a difficult time for that community. It's never too late. You can't turn back the hands of time. You can only make the most of whatever time you have left. And whether you're 30, 40, 50, there's always time for opportunity, and you're never too late to start something that looks appealing and that you want to be involved in.
Okay. So at 27, when both of those businesses failed, was your mindset like, are you just naturally like, it is what it is, I'm gonna move forward? Or was there like a period where like, crap, what am I going to do now? And then maybe scrambling a little bit before picking it back up and moving forward?
It was a rough time, but I have the blessing of having family. So I knew I would always have a place to live and would always have food in my stomach. That's a blessing. Not everybody has that blessing. And it makes it a little more difficult to turn your back on the paycheck and go do your own thing. And I'm aware of that. I had some privilege there. But I went down to the market was so horrible in Pocatello at that time. I went down to Salt Lake. I got the first job I could get, which was selling tickets to a circus for a fundraiser. Okay.
That was your job.
And that was my job, and it was horrible. But I got a job. I got a job quick. And the first one I could get that I said, okay, I can afford to have a little studio apartment and get back on my feet here. Within a matter of a month, I got a job with one of the leading restaurant groups in that market. 2 months later, they had an opening for a GM, and there we go. So yeah, I've had bumps in the road, but you just push reset and start over. The only thing that would have kept me from doing that is poor health. And I've always had good health. And if you've got good health, then there's no excuse to not be out there making a success of yourself.
Okay. So after Salt Lake, you took the GM job, moved back up to Pocatello for a little while. I know, let's see, I'm trying to think if I want to go here. What was your experience going back to where you started? And how was that whole thing?
It was fun. I took over the large hotel convention center in Pocatello, largest property, took it over as general manager. When it opened some 20 years prior, I was a waiter in their restaurant going to
Okay.
college. And
Okay.
some of the people still worked there, which was crazy. So it was an outstanding experience. And it was during that time period that my wife, Cynthia, and I purchased a small 54-room hotel in town right across from campus. And
Okay.
for a while, I kept my job with the group that owned the hotel there in town, and along with about 30 other hotels they owned. And we owned the new property that we just bought. I bring that up because there are entrepreneurial opportunities that a person can initiate while still keeping the steady paycheck, paying the
Okay.
bills.
Okay.
And that's what we did. I had a big, beautiful home in Salt Lake, right on State Street, going up to the Capitol, all those big old houses
Yeah.
there. Well, I bought it when nobody wanted them. Nobody. I bought it for $5,000 down. Nobody wanted those things then. Well, 10 years later, they were the thing.
Yeah.
And so sold that, bought a 30-unit apartment complex in Pocatello because I didn't need as big a house in Pocatello as the funds would have provided. So
Okay.
there's another example of yes, had a nice home in Pocatello, but had a one-time investment opportunity. Could have bought a Ferrari, bought an apartment complex instead,
Yeah.
and that started it for us. Cynthia and I managed the apartment complex, the evenings, weekends. We're able to buy the hotel. And then a new owner came into the hotel that I was running and said, we understand that you own a hotel on the other side of town. And I said, well, yeah, I do. Says, it's a tiny hotel and this is the biggest one. We don't compete. They said,
Yeah.
well, we're kind of uncomfortable with that. So we'd like you to transfer to Boise or perhaps sell your hotel. And I said, I'll take door number 3. We're going to go do our own thing. So that was our moment that we jumped from part-time investors pulling paychecks to took the leap and became full-time entrepreneurs. Now, Cynthia still stayed. She was a marketing director with a large financial group in the market. She stayed with them
Oh.
for a few months. And what we found was I had newfound freedom. Doesn't mean I wasn't working a lot, but if I
Yeah.
needed Tuesday off, I can take Tuesday off. But you're only as free as your spouse in a lot of those things.
Okay.
So she made the jump. We said, if you were here selling hotel rooms, you'd probably make at least as much or more than you're making with your financial group that you're working for. And then we said, I think we're ready to take the leap.
Okay.
She did, and it was the right move.
Great. So there are a couple things that again you're making me think of all these questions and awesome things. So for you, we're gonna rewind back to when you sold the house in Salt Lake and decided to buy units in Pocatello. Was the temptation there still to blow the money on something extravagant like a car, like something? And what was your mentality in being able to choose, the long term benefit rather than the short term instant gratification thing?
It has never been that much of a temptation because you buy, money is about purchasing utils of satisfaction.
Okay.
And certainly there's utils of satisfaction in a bigger home or a vacation or a new car.
Yeah.
But for us, there was also great utils of satisfaction from growing our business and what
Okay.
that brought to us. That
Okay.
was stronger for us. So
Okay.
it wasn't a difficult sacrifice. It was, look what we could do with the money. Look what it would do for us long term. Isn't this exciting?
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that's difficult for some people, or maybe even more people than I realized, to really distinguish, which is the better option in reality. And I think that's a good way to probably, compare the two. And obviously, it's been a huge benefit to you and your wife and your guys's success story. And then the other thing is when hotel gave you the ultimatum of, option one or two. You decided to do option three. Um, is that Are you typically the type of personality to be like, no, I'm going to make my own options? Because there are people that would choose one or the other, and they kind of get stuck in either of those frames. But you made your own option.
It's one of the biggest secrets in life is to not let someone else define what your options are, because they're telling you what their options are.
Okay.
So you have to be able to take a step back and truly assess the situation, and whether it's minor or major. And for us, obviously, that was major, and
Yeah.
really look at what your options are. And, we were in a position to be able to take the leap. If we weren't firm in our commitment to be able to do that, then that would have altered our options, but they still would have been our options and not someone else's.
Okay. So was that an intuitive thing for you that you've always just had, or did you have to learn to make your own options? Because, like in my experience as a parent, this is a parenting tactic that I use with my kids, where I say, "Do you want to eat your dinner or go to bed?" Like I give them one or the other. That's a terrible example, but I give them two options so that they can feel like they're choosing, what they want. But I do have one of my three kids. She's the third option type of person, where I tried that tactic with her, and she's like, "No, I want to stay awake and eat candy." Like that's what I choose, and it makes me laugh. So that's why I kind of think, is it an intuitive thing, or was it like a learned experience for you to finally, to develop that skill into creating your own option?
It's interesting. I've never reflected on it, but I would have to say it's intuitive.
Okay.
I would suggest that um, as a manager, one of your great skills that you try to develop is to make your own assessment of a situation. You can't always believe
Okay.
what you hear.
Okay.
And so you have to take a step back and say, well, this is probably what's really going on. You're not always going to be right, but I think you're
Yeah.
going to be more right than if you just kind of say, well, that's what they said, so that must be it. So it's kind of the same concept. You have to take a step back, ask what is congruent with your goals, your beliefs, and what you think
Okay.
will be successful, and realize that other people's options or comments or directives may not be all inclusive of all of the options. Maybe they're doing it in their best interest, and I don't fault that from someone, or maybe
Yeah.
they just simply hadn't thought that there was a door number three.
Okay. Okay. Um, all right. This is a question I sent you. How have relationships played a significant role in your success? So whether that's, relationship with your wife, relationship with peers, employees, what have you, what role has that played in your success?
It's 90% of the game. You
Oh,
can't do this on your own. So,
90%. Wow.
yeah, I think, as I shared in the beginning, knowing that I had a family that if I went out and took a non-conventional path, I'm not going to be homeless. I'm
Yeah.
not going to be hungry. That doesn't mean that as I started a family that I wasn't responsible, but I've always known that I had that worst case scenario is better than some others might have. And that's a great blessing.
Yeah.
Then, Cynthia and I have worked as partners now for over 20 years,
Yeah.
and all marriages have complications. Well,
Yeah.
throw business partnership into it, and it does not lessen those complications. And you have to
I can imagine.
divide between a disagreement about business, and that's not your marriage. And two partners, if they don't disagree about some issues from time to time in business, then you're going to leave things on the table because everybody's,
Yeah.
too singularly focused.
Okay.
So that relationship has been the most important in terms of the growth of our company. And we've been successful in dividing and conquer the leadership duties. Our relationship with our banker, we've had the same banker. We've gotten all but one of our loans for these 20 plus years from the same banker. He has, during
Oh,
that time period, been with 3 different regional banks. We have just stayed with him.
yeah.
And for the last decade, it can just be a call up and say, hey, we've found a new asset, and this is the kind of money we'll want. And we're sitting in, we're talking millions of dollars in hotels.
Yeah.
Where the money is there within, as little as 30 and 60 days. So that's been important. And then the final thing that's important is our relationship with our team members. Trust, respect, trying to sympathize with their challenges,
Yeah.
let them know that we appreciate what they do for us. So any one of those relationships sours,
Okay.
and we struggle.
Yeah.
Those are
So,
all key relationships.
so is there like a roadmap that you kind of, or I guess a template that you use that can apply to all of these different types of relationships in order to make them work? Or is it just like you figure it out with each one? It's all case by case type of situation.
There are some basics in management. And I have 2 sons that just graduated from college in very different paths, one in fashion, one in hospitality.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that they teach management courses. And then there are concepts in management that are important. But at the end of the day, to manage people, it's a boots on ground situation,
Okay.
and you're right. And you manage different people. To manage everyone the same would be naive, because people aren't the same.
Okay.
But everyone appreciates respect.
Okay.
Everyone appreciates being acknowledged for what they did. Those are the
Okay.
easy ones. The hard
Yeah.
ones are how they deal with discipline, and how they deal with discussing failure. And you have both in business. You have good months, you have bad months. You have good years, you
Yeah.
have bad years. So those things are something that your skills develop. And I
Okay.
continue to develop. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been
Yeah.
managing people for over 40 years. But people change. And
Okay.
so my skills had better change. I can't
Yeah.
manage a 30-year-old now like I managed one 20 years ago. They have
Yeah.
different goals, different aspirations, and different views of life. And so
Okay.
you have to continue to change and continue to develop and alter your skills and your management of others if you want to be successful.
Okay. And then I want to hit on just a little bit your marriage and your business relationship with your wife. I've surprisingly, now that I'm thinking about it, I know quite a few people who go into business with their spouses, and
Mhm.
you know, probably a good majority of them seem like they do really well. Um, was there like a time period where you were like, I don't know if this is gonna work, like maybe let's just be married and forget about business partners? um were there challenges that you had to overcome in order to be able to do that, or was it pretty like pretty easy to, since you already have this relationship in marriage, just make a couple adjustments and do the same thing in business?
There was never a time that we thought this isn't working, this isn't healthy for us.
Okay.
There was never a time that it was easy either.
Okay.
Um, it it requires attention. A good example. Um, if a husband and wife have different careers and they come home, and the husband can talk about his day and how this person did this person did that, oh my goodness, had a bad day, and the wife can talk about her day, and you sympathize.
Yeah.
um, and then you probably have dinner and move on. With the uh, when you have the same essentially job,
Yeah.
and it's with the same company, and that company is so close to your family, you can't leave it really. um, I could come home and complain about something, and Cynthia would think, oh God, that's my aspect. I've traditionally, Cynthia took revenue,
Okay.
sales, all that. I took operations and finance.
Okay.
Okay, so I see, oh, I come home and say, oh, we're just having a horrible month in, one of our markets. And so she's thinking, oh, that's, my sales, da, 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 da. Well, that wasn't the point of the conversation, but yet that's how it can be seen. So
Okay.
you have to acknowledge that, in my opinion, when a husband and wife work together. Cynthia and I did as good a job as we could on dividing areas of responsibility.
Okay.
And so that's important. And also for our team members, then they knew who the boss was on that issue. And that was important. You know, you don't want to think, oh, Steve told me to do this and Cynthia told me to do that. What am I supposed to do? We wanted to have as little of that as possible, because that's not healthy for your company. And then to realize again that a disagreement about business is not a disagreement about marriage. I'm not sure if any marriage could handle that. You have disagreements in marriage, you have disagreements in business. You better not stack them on top of each other if you want either environment to be healthy.
Okay. So do you recommend having a wife or a spouse as a business partner?
If you share the interests, and Cynthia and I did. Yeah, this is something we both wanted to do. And it's worked for us. And the benefits, you know, still the initial benefit is the freedom. Even if we only made what we would make if we were, you know, still working for the man, the freedom has been the biggest life-changing element, that you don't have to wonder if you can get to the kids' volleyball game, you know, if you can take that time off. And we've been able to take magnificent trips with our sons and help them to see the world. And we live in rural North Idaho, not a lot of diversity up here, and not a lot of big city environment. So we wanted to expose them to that, and all that was made possible because of our entrepreneurship and the flexibility of the schedule. I don't want to make it sound like we didn't work much. We worked a bunch, but it didn't feel like work.
Okay.
You know, it's just, I don't play video games. I don't watch a lot of TV. Cynthia doesn't do either. This is what we did with our time, and we did it because we enjoyed it. Never felt burdened by it.
Awesome. So, from the time period of, you know, Cynthia moving over and you guys finally working together in this industry, and, you know, the success afterwards, what were some of the, were there any challenges that you had to overcome in that time span to really be successful?
We had a plan and we worked it, and we had some good fortune. The good fortune was, let's say before the 07, 08 real estate turned down, prices had gotten high for hotels. And so even though we've been kind of buying an asset every year, we didn't for a couple of years. Well, it's because the prices they seemed too high. And I'm thinking, well, if they always stay high, we're going to miss the boat. So, but you know, that when you buy a business, you can calculate what sort of income it's going to generate and what you can pay for it. We didn't buy during that time period. Well, that was wise. The prices were inflated. We have always been conservative. Well, not always. Our first two properties, the little one that we talked about, and then we bought another full service property in Pocatello. They needed to go well. We had rolled the dice, but we were confident enough based on our numbers and our knowledge of the market that we were right. So those went well for us. And then unbeknownst blessing, the university, there were two hotels that we competed with one other hotel right by the university. Well, one day the vice president of finance came in and said, Steve, got some good news. We just bought the hotel next door for student housing. That was a good day. And he said, but it was, you know, Bob said then, he said, you know, Steve, I hope someday when you're successful, you'll remember the university. And we have done so. But we always grew conservatively. And we never lied to our banker, because your banker, you know, you might think, oh, the bank doesn't want to loan any money. They can't see this as a good deal. Banks are in the business of loaning money. They want to loan money, they know a good deal, and they know a deal that's too close to the edge. So we were always honest. And I remember my banker saying, you know, Steve, you're one of our very few clients that when you turn in these prospectus, when you're getting a loan, you end up doing better. Well, that's because I always looked at conservatively what we were very, very high level of confidence we would do.
Okay.
So we didn't, once we got the first couple under our belts, and then it was a little tight then after that, we grew conservatively.
Okay.
And so then when the downturns came, even COVID, we were okay. I'm not saying great.
Yeah.
I'm saying we were okay. I had a good friend in the real estate business tell me some 20 years ago, because he had moved to Sun Valley and it didn't go well there and had to start over. He said, Steve, you got a good start. Don't put yourself in a position that you're going to have to start over. And
Okay.
those were wise words. And we have followed that and are now, we liquidated one of our major properties early this year and took the proceeds from that and paid off all of our debt. That's a good place to be.
Yeah. So were you never tempted to like roll the dice?
Not once we got established. We had 2 properties. When we bought the second one, we rolled the dice on it, but we were just so sure that it was underperforming significantly. And then after that, we could have lived comfortably with those 2 assets.
Okay.
And why risk losing it? You know,
Okay.
how would our life have changed? So from that point on, we made sure we were in a good liquidity position before we would purchase. We have looked for, keys to success as a person is different than keys to success in an industry. In our hotel investments, what has been a major key to success? Acquiring the right assets at the right price. And so that was one of my most fulfilling things that I've done is I look at, 50 hotels a year for sale and maybe buy one and maybe buy none. But we have learned what our formula can improve. So we've always looked for underperforming assets. We're with a small franchise group that we own a small piece of. We want to be able to put that name on them for the most part. And so we've learned to identify assets that we can go in, add value to. When you add value to a real estate asset, all of a sudden your debt isn't the 80% that you borrowed, but maybe now it's 60% of what it's worth. And so you've created that cushion. And we have, let me knock on wood here. We have not yet struck out in the, 20 properties we've acquired and still hold or have acquired and sold over the 20 plus years.
Okay. So, your strategy's working out. So you can't say much about that. Do you have any advice for?
Yep.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for somebody who might have a tendency to have their eyes be a little bit bigger than their head, kind of thing, where they're always like, "Oh, this is a great opportunity," but then, that's all they really think about. I'm hinting. I'm talking about myself. I tend to do that.
Well, and it's good to have big eyes and it's good to have enthusiasm, but you have to, at the end of the day, business is numbers. And so there's a lot of things I can't speak to. I don't know how to make it as a pro basketball player, but I have a little bit of an idea how to make it, not just in hotels, but the hotel business is the real estate business, really.
Yeah.
And you have to understand the numbers. You have to understand your market as best you can. And then you have to understand your risk tolerance. And we stepped out in the beginning with pretty high risk, but after we were established and could have been fine for life with those assets, then we grew conservatively. We took our funds and had a comfortable life, always had a nice home, took some fun trips, but wanted to grow at a certain pace. And that was typically the priority.
Okay, so you're talking about risk, and what's like the simple definition of like risk? Is it just how much you have available to lose so you can risk more? Is that kind of the thought process behind it?
Risk is all about the statistical evaluation of whether an endeavor will or will not be successful and at what level. So if you're talking about real estate assets, you have to look at the market, what turn downs there might be, what upswing there might be, and how close to the edge you can walk.
Okay.
There are so many opportunities now with the sharing economy and all those things that you could start there. The home that I sold that I gave a $5,000 down payment on, a big old house in Salt Lake. I renovated the basement and rented it out. I shut off a door to an attic and rented it out. And I rented out a bedroom because it was a big old house and I was single.
Yeah.
And so those things allowed me to make the payment on that house. Now, what if everybody moved out? It would have been pretty tight.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you're covered. Now, sometimes I'll have people call and offer me odd deals on buying the hotels, and I don't say it, but I know it. They've been watching too many infomercials. Okay, the guy that says, borrow shows. And then, yeah, exactly. Take your equity out, buy another one, take your equity out. Okay. And then the market turns down and you lose it all. So a relationship with your banker, being honest with them, they can give you guidance and grow at a pace that you don't have to start over is our best advice. It worked for us and it can work for others. It's not brain surgery.
Yeah. So that was kind of my next question is, you were talking about all these different types of numbers and statistics and things that you try to look at before committing to a deal. To me, that sounds like a lot of numbers. And like, well, where do you get all these numbers? Is it like the banker? Is that your big number one person to get this data and these numbers, or did you have to find it on your own?
It is a lot of numbers, and it comes back to educating yourself.
Okay.
If I said, why are people not successful as entrepreneurs, or why do they not become entrepreneurs even though they talk about it? And the first one is a lot of people don't have an interest in that. They like the paycheck, they either like their job or at worst case can tolerate it, and then the job just becomes an end to a means. The means, they want to enjoy their life. They do. They get a paycheck that's enough to do that. It's all good. But people that talk about doing more and dream about doing more, first thing that keeps them from doing it is complacency.
Okay.
It's just not motivating enough to turn off Game of Thrones. They're not going to get. Then the second one is excuses. Yeah, well, I can't because, and some of those are real. And you have to filter out an actual concrete issue that you cannot overcome, and those things can happen, or just the fear of being on your own.
Yeah.
So excuses and fear. If you can filter through those, then lack of knowledge is the next element that keeps people from being successful. Now, when I was working in the hotel group, I had my bachelor's and was working on a master's. It was a large hotel group with significant assets. I don't know of anybody else in that group what their educational experience was. It just never came up. But the knowledge that I gained was of value. And so is a degree. A degree is nice to have, and bankers like to see degrees. But knowledge is what's powerful. And you can get knowledge on your own. Yeah, that's, buying a hotel, it's more complicated than buying a duplex.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I've been running hotels. So let's say that you've been managing convenience stores. Okay. You probably know how much your sales need to be, how much you're going to have in shrinkage from theft and whatnot, how much your markup is on gas. You're going to know those things. Well, that's the situation I was in. I've been running hotels. So I learned while getting paid. Yeah, I went to college too, but I learned working for others. They're giving me a paycheck, and I figured that out. And says, okay, I think I could do that on my own. What if somebody worked in a small clothing store, a small boutique? If they paid attention, they could probably figure it out, and then one day branch out on their own.
Oh man,
and you're
that
getting
is
paid for it while you learn.
yeah. There we go. Oh man, that is so valuable. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Um, hopefully, we can do something like this again. I am amazed at the amount of knowledge that you have, and I'm super grateful that you're willing to come and share a little bit of it with us.
I enjoyed it. It was a fun experience and hope to talk to you soon.